Tommy Robinson. The answer to the question, what name would you pick if you wanted to reinvent yourself as a bit of a double-R bastard, but your real name is Stephen Yaxley-Lennon, which makes you sound like a middle-aged tax accountant from Winchester. He's made a bit of a name for himself for being on the front line of the culture wars, which basically makes him a war hero if you think about it. Today, we're going to take a look at the life and times of old Tommy 10 Names, and perhaps we can uncover whether he's the working class hero they say he is, or just another wealthy, cowardly, lying, racist grifter that's got a longer rap sheet than Eminem. Now let's get started because we've all got shit to do. Tommy grew up in Luton in the early 80s. His mum was Irish and worked at a bakery, and his dad worked at a Vauxhall plant, so a very working class upbringing. He explains that growing up in Luton is basically what made him, with my only real criticism being that it made him a fucking idiot. As I said, he spent his formative years in Luton around the late 80s through to the early 2000s. In his recent interview with Jordan Peterson, he explains that he grew up in a very multicultural area, which is true. Luton was, and remains to be, one of the most culturally diverse towns in the UK. Lots of skin colours and religions, including, he says, Muslims. But early on, he identified a problem specifically with Muslims that had immigrated to the UK from countries like Pakistan, where the religion is intrinsically tied to culture and law. He says that, in his experience, there was no effort being made by the government, the local council, or the immigrants themselves to integrate into the area. Obviously, it's sort of hard to confirm or deny personal experiences, but it does correlate pretty well with accounts from BBC columnist Nicky Cardwell, amongst others, who recount the impact that a rapid increase in population had on a town whose jobs were already in decline due to deindustrialisation. Add on top of it the growth of a particularly conservative religion, then the dawn of the internet era and truly worldwide communication, then a deterioration and defunding of an already strained police service, and you get some not fucking good outcomes. Who'd have thought it? By the early 2000s, the UK was hearing whispers of grooming gangs comprised of almost exclusively Muslim men operating in areas like Luton, Huddersfield, and Rochdale. These gangs were reported to have held close ties to local drug gangs too, also of a similar demographic. Let me be clear here for all of my fellow liberal lefty buddies. Pointing these things out is not conjecture, and it's not racism. It is a factual statement to say that these grooming gangs existed, and they were predominantly immigrants and Muslims. Men are still being convicted decades after the crimes took place, and it's disgusting. Agreeing that this is the case doesn't make you anything at all like Tommy Robinson, and by rejecting or ignoring this fact, you only push people in his direction. The truth is that Tommy likes to focus on high-profile cases like the ones we mentioned earlier, but when you read the Home Office's own investigation into child sexual exploitation, linked in the description, they say that their research seems to suggest that the majority of group-based CSE offenders are white, but also that the data shouldn't be taken too seriously because it's incomplete. They conclude after conversations with police forces on the ground that, while each group tends to be comprised of people of a similar race, group-based offenders come from all walks of life and all religions. As we move forward, I want you to ask yourself, is Tommy really concerned with being principally opposed to these crimes? Or does he only seem to bang the drum when these crimes are committed by people of a certain race or religion? So Tommy saw his hometown become something he no longer recognised. He saw criminal gangs operating in his streets. Oh, no, sorry, no, not those ones. Not those ones. Those are just regular violent criminals. Yes, exactly, those ones. God, they really are particularly scary to me, but I can't quite put my finger on why. It really is a mystery. He saw hate preachers like Abu Hamza and Omar Bakri being invited to speak at the rapidly growing networks of mosques in the area. He saw the growing number of international terrorists having their origins traced to Luton. He felt that the police were too afraid of seeming anti-woke if they arrested Muslim criminals. These moments all culminated in him deciding to use his skills to do something about it. So what are his skills? Well, he was a member of the Luton hooligan scene for a few years. So, for those wondering, it's sort of like a club for boys that really like fighting and also have a passing interest in football. You make supporting your local football club your entire identity and go to matches with the sole intent of fighting other fans. Like that film Green Street back in the day with Frodo in it. Except I'd frankly rather spend a weekend in Mordor than Luton. What other skills does he have? He's got the skill of understanding how to get locked up for 12 months for assaulting an off-duty police officer who tried to intervene when an argument with his then-wife got out of control. It is a bit of a niche one, I'll grant you, but you never know. Now, we're going to be uncovering a lot of convictions on our mate Tommy's record, and so I'll be keeping a handy tally as we move forward, just so you don't forget all of the stupid, deceitful, and hypocritical shit he's been factually proven to have done. Now, this assault was back in 2005, around the same time he made the questionable decision to join the British Nationalist Party, BNP. He says that he joined because he was angry at the Muslim fundamentalists that praised the 9/11 attacks, but left because he didn't realise the party was racist. So, to be clear, he joined a party called the British Nationalists, a party that didn't allow non-whites to join it, that at the time was led by Nick Griffin, a man who had been previously convicted for, quote, distributing racially inflammatory material. A man that was also in the National Front. A man who was most famous, at least at the time, for denying the Holocaust. In the face of all of this very widely available information, Tommy had no fucking clue the party might have had a smidge of racism until he attended a party meeting with some friends and they asked the black guys to wait outside. That is what finally got the old spidey senses tingling for our mate Tommy Ten Names. After leaving the BNP, he would go on to find his love for what he calls activism. I call it rioting, but hey-ho. In 2009, he founded the English Defence League, EDL, with his cousin Kevin Carroll. Try saying that 3 times fast. They would make it their mission to provide an opposition to the Islamic fundamentalists that refuse to follow the English rule of law. They did this predominantly by assaulting people, racially harassing people, causing hundreds of thousands of pounds in criminal damages at the cost of the taxpayer, naturally, and buying illegal recreational drugs, because apparently buying cocaine is fine as long as you buy it from white drug dealers. Their logo is emblazoned with the phrase in hoc signo vinces, which Google tells me is Latin and translates to in this sign thou shalt conquer. Oh my, a group of law-breaking zealots that want to conquer people that don't agree with them in a free society while using religious iconography. I can see why they're totally different to the people they stand against. So the EDL starts to pick up steam. It goes national. We get an EDL Cornwall division for those that think those ruddy Muslims are taking our jobs. That one might not be true to be fair, but I choose to believe it because it makes me laugh. In August 2010, Tommy led a group of Luton football fans into a mass brawl against a bunch of Newport County fans. Reports say he was at the forefront of the action, taunting the opposing fans and chanting EDL till I die. He was charged and sentenced to a 12-month community rehabilitation order, 150 hours of unpaid work, a £650 fine, and was banned from the old footy for 3 years because of his ludicrous display. When he left the court, he said that he was being done for what he's saying, rather than what he's doing, and that it's a police state. Maybe, Tommy, and this is a bit of an out there kind of thought, maybe it'll seem less of a police state if you stopped committing violent crimes in broad daylight, in public, and in front of police officers. Just a thought, but let's add threatening, abusive, or insulting behaviour to the tally. Okay, so 2012, Tommy gets arrested again. This time for travelling to the USA using another man's passport. He entered the US using the name Andrew McMaster, apparently one of his mates, because he knew that if he used his own identity, he would have been refused entry. You know, what with him being a convicted violent criminal and stuff. So he enters into the country via JFK Airport, he gets found out when they take his fingerprints and realise that they don't match the passport, then he flees the US using his actual passport, which is obviously in the name of Paul Harris, correct. He pled guilty and was sentenced in 2013 to 10 months in prison. For those of you that haven't quite caught the sickly sweet scent of irony here, this is proof that Tommy Robinson isn't actually opposed to people entering a country illegally at all. He's done it himself, as a fighting-age male not accompanied by family no less. So let's add entering a country illegally to the tally and move on. After 4 years of leading the EDL, Tommy left in October 2013. He says that he felt the group was becoming too violent, too extreme, and he wanted to put more of a focus on his activism by democratic means. In a press conference, he announced that he has thrown in with an organisation called Quilliam. Quilliam was a think tank co-founded by Majid Nawaz that focused its efforts on countering extremism within the Muslim community. At the time, this was a bit of a breakthrough for a lot of people. I mean, Majid is formerly a Muslim extremist turned campaigner for reform within the religion. Tommy was saying all the right things. He acknowledged the dangers of far-right extremism. It was all good shit. And so, the law-breaking, irresponsible Tommy was a thing of the past, and he was moving forward as a responsible, and he's in jail. Again. That's right, in November 2013, just a month after his departure from the EDL, he pled guilty to mortgage fraud. Now, in this interview right here, Tommy plays it off saying that all he did was lend his poor little brother-in-law a deposit, but the guy lied about his salary on the forms. It wasn't his fault, it's just the system being out to get him. The only problem with that, and it really is a rather nitpicky point, is that he wasn't the only person charged in the investigation. He also told a porcupine that he fraudulently obtained 2 mortgages, not just the one. As the prosecution outlined it, he would provide a loan for a deposit, then point them in the direction of a mortgage broker named Deborah Rothschild. She assisted Tommy's brother-in-law, as well as Tommy's cousin and one other person, by providing them with fake income details and fake pay slips in order to fraudulently claim £640,000. Both she and Tommy got 18 months inside. The judge noted that, quote, this was an operation which was fraudulent from the outset and involved a significant amount of forward planning. He went on to say that he believes our mate Tommy was the instigator, if not the architect, of some of the frauds. Everyone involved admitted their intent was to defraud the banks providing the loans, including our pal Tommy, and everyone got locked up for it. So let's add mortgage fraud to the conviction tally. Now, Tommy ended up spending 22 weeks in prison, of which he spent most of his time in solitary confinement. He says that this was all mental warfare and he was put in solitary because there were Muslims that wanted to hurt him in the prison. So, okay? To be clear, Tommy says that Muslims aren't being policed because the police are too scared of seeming racist, but also there's a shitload of Muslims in prison, and Tommy doesn't like that our prison system contains the Muslim criminals that he campaigned to have locked up. So, he gets to prison, everyone wants to kill him, so the prison puts him in solitary to protect his life. What do you expect them to do, Tommy? You want them to fucking stick you in the Hilton or something? Think about it. For 5 seconds, you thick bastard. All you had to do was not commit mortgage fraud. That's it. Just stop being a criminal. You aren't a fucking victim here. So, Tommy gets out of prison, and it turns out that Quilliam have halved his payments while he was inside on the basis that, he was in fucking prison and couldn't do anything. After relationships with the think tank broke down, they put out a statement in 2015 distancing themselves from him, saying he'd never been employed by them and that they didn't claim that they had de-radicalized him, blah blah blah. Tommy also wrote in his book Enemy of the State that they were just using one another and nothing productive came out of it. By 2016, Tommy had established a group called Pegida UK. It was a UK arm of a German far-right anti-Muslim whatever the fuck we've all seen and heard a million times before. He promised that this time he would take a leaf out of the Germans' book and march peacefully against those races and religions they believe are bad for their country. Because if there's one thing the Germans are famous for, it's marching peacefully against religions they dislike. Anyway, Tommy stepped down and took on the role of advisor almost immediately after they were established, and the group kinda just fizzled out into basically nothing by the end of 2016. 2017, Tommy finds a new grift. This time, he's reinvented himself as a journalist. He joins Rebel News, a right-wing Canadian-born website news thing. He was reportedly being paid about £5,000 a month, and he would basically just wait for horrible things to happen, then ignore facts and nuance, and just shout about how Muslims are shit. After the Manchester Arena attack, for example, he ranted about how Muslims are enemy combatants who want to kill you, maim you, and destroy you. Way to fight back against extremism, Tommy. In May 2017, he was arrested for recording 4 men outside of Canterbury Crown Court who were later, very important word there, later convicted of sexually assaulting a teenage girl. We will talk about why what he did was extremely stupid and so brazenly contrasts the Western democratic ideals that he so desperately wants others to follow in a second, but when he was arrested, his supporters raised £20,000 for him in a matter of hours. Now that is dedication to the cause right there. He was given a 3-month suspended sentence, which means that he's being let go, but if he commits another crime, then he will have to serve those 3 months as well as any other sentence. So let's add contempt of court to the tally and crack on. 2018, Tommy goes and gets arrested outside Leeds Crown Court for, drumroll please, live streaming defendants during an active trial. Bear in mind that Tommy has found a new vocation as a journalist since he joined Rebel News, and he swears that this is just another example of the judiciary targeting him for telling some home truths about Islam. Here he is wearing a t-shirt that says convicted of journalism, because he's a slimy little grifter that's trying to exploit you and your outrage for donations. Of course, you're not to know this, but I imagine most journalists that have ever so much as Googled the word journalism would know that there are limits on what you can report on during an active case. If you're found to be live streaming the defendants in a grooming case entering into court, you are encouraging vigilante action to be taken against the now very much identifiable defendants. Tommy was also making some inflammatory and prejudicial statements that imply the defendants are guilty. Now, defendants means that they haven't been convicted of anything yet, unlike Tommy. And the phrase innocent until proven guilty isn't just a funky catchphrase that sounds cool, it's one of the cornerstones of our democratic freedom itself. Again, it might all be the same to this feckless cunt given that he's been charged more times than your mum's vibrator, but you can't just go and treat people as guilty before they've had their fair trial, regardless of what you reckon. By doing what Tommy did, he almost forced a retrial, which would have cost thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money, and what's worse, he could have caused a mistrial. That means the defendants could have walked away as free men, regardless of the evidence presented against them. If I were feeling spicy, I'd say that Tommy Robinson has officially done more to help rapists avoid jail than most criminal defence solicitors. Don't take my word for it though, even Lee Anderson came to the same conclusion when the Home Office called rioters criminals before they were found guilty of any crimes, so it's great to see that both Lee and I agree on this, and we both stand together in calling Tommy Robinson a bastard. Thankfully, Tommy was found guilty in July of 2019 for contempt of court and was given 6 months inside, plus another 3 months because of the suspended sentence we spoke about earlier. So let's add another count of contempt of court to the tally, but hold on to your hats, because we aren't done with 2018 yet. In November of that year, the leader of the UK Independence Party, UKIP, Mr. Gerard Batten, appointed Tommy as an advisor. This move was pretty controversial, even with members of UKIP, and especially so given that Tommy wouldn't actually have been allowed to join the party itself because it prohibits anybody that's ever been a member of the EDL from joining. Apparently, Mr. Batten is happy to keep that rule in place, but also wants to hire the man that created the EDL with multiple criminal convictions for violent offences, financial fraud, and, hilariously, entering a country illegally. This prompted the resignation of Nigel Farage from the party, who said that Batten was dragging the party in a shameful direction. Imagine how much of a complete cunt you need to be for Nigel fucking Farage to call you a racist piece of shit. In 2019, Tommy ran as an independent candidate in the MEP elections for North West England. He paid his £5,000 deposit to run, and after a shockingly ineffective campaign, he ended in 8th place with only 2.2% of the vote. I only mention this because, for all the followers he has on social media, he can never seem to muster up anything other than violent riots. Whenever he tries to engage with any form of democratic system, he exposes just how unpopular he actually is, and how unwilling any of his followers are to do anything besides burning down local communities while screaming racial slurs. For what it's worth, Gerard Batten also lost his seat in London as well, so that's a nice little Brucey bonus. Alright, so before I talk about the events of 2021, I need to tell you about something that happened a few years before. So in 2018, a video emerged of a 15-year-old Syrian refugee being pushed to the ground by a 16-year-old kid at Almondbury Community School. The attacking boy poured water over his face while saying things like, "I will drown you," and it made international news. This is where Tommy decided to jump right in balls first and started doing a journalism all over the place. So he gets his camera out, and he posts videos online accusing the Syrian boy of being a violent kid who beats girls black and blue, as well as threatening to stab other students. In response, the victim, Jamal, started legal proceedings to sue Tommy for libel, given that he, made libelous comments about him. The trial finally kicked off in April 2021. On the one side, we had Jamal, the Syrian boy, and his professional legal team with literal video evidence of Tommy making completely unsubstantiated claims. And on the other side, we had Tommy Robinson choosing to represent himself because he's a dickhead with a fucking idiot as a client. By the end of July, Tommy was found to have made statements amounting to libel and was ordered to pay £100,000 in damages to Jamal, as well as covering the legal costs that were estimated to be around £500,000. The judge, who saw all of Tommy's most convincing evidence, said that he failed to prove every single claim, with the evidence falling woefully short of the legal standard. FYI, I've added the judgment publication to the description for those that care about it, but honestly, it's a super boring read, so I don't blame you for not reading it. Now, let's slap libel onto the tally and move swiftly on, because this is also not the only drama in 2021. In January, a journalist named Lizzie Dearden reaches out to Tommy for comment on a story she's writing about allegations that he's misused financial donations from his supporters. Here's what Tommy did in response. He turns up at her home, at night, in a black Range Rover with another man. He buzzes the building's intercom, tells Lizzie and her boyfriend Samuel to come down to talk. When they refuse, he tries to gain access to the building but is stopped by security, where he continues to shout, "Samuel, I know you're inside. Come out and we'll sort this out. We'll be back every day if we have to." They then changed tactics, opting to shout, "There's a paedophile living in this building," while his sidekick blared the horn and flashed the lights into the building. Tommy was arrested, but continues to post online about the couple and accusing Sam of being a nonce. Tommy was issued a 5-year stalking order for trying to silence someone's right to free speech and infringe on the free press. The thing he's been accusing everybody in the world of for the last 2 decades. Let's add being a creepy stalker to the tally. I don't think it's technically a conviction, but it is technically a great example of him being a complete fucking smackhead. Oh, okay, cool, almost there. Fuck me. Don't check the timestamp. I'm sure it's just been a fleeting video with barely any time left on the clock. So let's skip to 2023. Tommy releases another documentary called Silenced. This one's all about the school bullying incident back in 2018, and he repeats the libelous claims he previously made. In it, he destroys the liberal establishment's narrative by exposing the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Well, he did forget to mention a few facts, like how the boy was bullied for years leading up to this supposed one-off harmless schoolyard scrap, to the point where he actually wrote to his local counsellor for help. He didn't mention that Tommy actually knows the bully's older brother, Reese, who was a member of Britain First and had previously been jailed for attacking a group of teenagers. Here they are, pictured together back in 2009. He also didn't mention that the bully's mother was also in court in 2017 for racially aggravated behaviour. He also didn't mention that Jamal's sister was also bullied by students at the school. But I'm sure she was also a secret villain that just so happened to have not been recorded being a completely evil bitch. Again, for the record, this Jamal kid might well have been a complete cunt. He might have been a full-on dickhead, but the fact remains that there is video evidence of him being assaulted, and Tommy is utterly failing to understand the difference between presenting something someone told you as the truth and meeting the legal standard for evidence. Keep this in mind, because we will come back to it later. Okay, 2024. On Saturday, the 27th of July, Tommy Robinson held a rally in Trafalgar Square, London. He claims the event was the biggest patriotic rally the UK has ever seen, but he also claims that he's not a complete fucking loser, so we can't really take his opinion seriously. Thousands of people turned up, with counter-protesters also doing numbers as they were led by Jeremy Corbyn and others. Now, I'm a big fan of protesting. Love all that, fill your boots, protest whatever the fuck you want. The problem with this event is that Tommy decided to use it to screen his documentary Silenced. Remember I said that documentary about the libel case he lost? Well, he was served with contempt proceedings in June after he created the film initially, which obviously breached the injunction issued to him back in the day. This screening at this rally was another breach of that injunction, and was likely going to get him in a lot of trouble. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but if I were ever going to prosecute somebody for breaking the terms of their injunction, you'd be making my job easy if there were recorded evidence of them repeating their claims to thousands of people in one of the biggest cities in the world with almost 1,000 policeman officers in attendance. On the following day, Sunday the 28th, Tommy gets arrested at the Channel Tunnel under Section 7 of the Terrorism Act. Sounds scary, but all it means is that officers can detain people at the border without reasonable suspicion if they believe that they are likely to be engaged in acts of terrorism. Anyway, Tommy was released on unconditional bail and fucked off out of the country again. A warrant has been issued for Tommy's arrest, but it won't be carried out until October. Now, as you may know, on Monday the 29th of July, the day after Tommy leaves the country to a mystery location, a man entered a Taylor Swift-themed dance and yoga class with a knife. He killed 3 children, injuring 8 more, as well as 2 adults. Within hours of the attack, the very suspect news website Channel 3 Now released an article claiming that the attacker was a 17-year-old named Ali Al-Shakati, who they claimed was an asylum seeker that arrived in the UK by boat in 2023. Despite the article having no author and citing no sources, that's all most of these cunts needed to start treating it as if it were announced by Jesus Christ himself. The reality, for those of us that were interested, is that the attacker was a 17-year-old autistic boy, born in Cardiff and was a Christian. By the time this information was released, it was already too late to matter. Nigel Farage was stirring shit, Andrew Tate was stirring shit from his Bugatti, and Tommy was starting to get that racially motivated hate boner as well. Riots broke out. They started in Southport and expanded over the following week or so to London, Manchester, Hartlepool, Plymouth, Sunderland, and even so far as Belfast. Rioters, patriots, travelled from far and wide to pay tribute to the victims and defend our country by destroying local businesses, public infrastructure, and assaulting police officers. They destroyed mosques, set cars and buildings on fire, and attempted to set fire to hotels with asylum seekers and staff still inside. Tommy urged his followers to reconsider their approach, to stop the violence, and understand that by being violent to civilians, they are showing that they're no better than the criminals they stand against. Only joking, it was a shit show, obviously. Remember I said earlier that old working-class Tommy Robinson left the country after he was given bail? Well, he jetted off to Cyprus and was tweeting his support for the rioters destroying actually working-class people's communities from a £400 a night 5-star hotel with views of the Mediterranean. Sounds lovely. He says he booked the getaway to spend some quality time with the family, and I'm sure he probably did manage to sneak a sentence or two into conversation as he glanced up from his non-stop fucking tweeting. Tommy says that he didn't want anyone to know where he was, and that he was outraged that the location was outed by the Daily Mail. Now, is it deliciously ironic that, while inciting violent riots, he is all of a sudden afraid for the safety of himself and his family? Well, yeah, I'm only human for fuck's sake. Is it hilarious that the man who doxed a journalist for writing an article about him and accused her partner of being a nonce is now upset that people find it acceptable to expose where he can be found at any given time? Yeah, it absolutely is hilarious. Yes, of course it is. So, that's where we're up to right now. The riots fizzled out a couple of weeks ago, with around 600 arrests made and 150 charges against people as young as 11. Now we're just sort of waiting for Tommy to get back off his jolly sometime before next month so he can go in front of another judge and we can add another contempt of court charge to our tally. But we're not done. No, we're not done yet. See, everything up until now was just laying the foundation. An amuse-bouche, if you will. If you're a fan of Tommy Robinson watching this video and you still think that, despite what we've uncovered here, he's still not that bad of a guy, this is the part where you need to put on your brown trousers and strap in. If there's one thing that becomes clear in Tommy's history, it's that he is definitely, principally opposed to nonces. Can't stand them. The abuse of women and children in Tommy's eyes is a moral abomination and should never be tolerated at all. If there's one thing we know for sure, it's that Tommy would never stand alongside such people. It's not Muslims he hates, after all. It's criminals that coerce and intimidate vulnerable women and children to exploit them.
Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
In June of 2010, back when Tommy was top shag of the EDL, his close friend Richard Price was convicted of possessing crack cocaine, and 4 indecent images of children that he downloaded from the onlines. Tommy, displaying his opposition to noncery, condemned Price when he admitted to 4 counts of making indecent images of children. Oh wait, sorry, Tommy campaigned with other EDL members to win justice for Richard Price. He supported him even after he admitted that he was charged with creating the images. He has a post from the EDL at the time telling everyone that it was because he bought a second-hand computer. It wasn't, and that, also, the images weren't even that bad. As time went on and Tommy's position became untenable, he finally distanced himself because supporting nonces is wrong?
Correct. Oh, thanks.
Now look, I know what you're saying, and I agree. It was a one-off, a glitch in the Matrix. If the EDL was actually rife with criminals, druggies, and rapists, that means they'd be no different to the people they purport to stand against. Just 2 sides of the same coin, and there's no way that could be the case. Is there? In 2018, senior EDL member Lee McMillan was jailed for 17 years for grooming a 10-year-old girl in the mid-90s. He would buy her cigarettes and alcohol, then assault her. His victim reports that he would tell her that she mustn't tell her mum because she'd be really upset. He assaulted her approximately 100 times over 5 years. That's not all either. On screen now is a list of EDL members and their splinter organisations that have been exposed as being sex offenders. Now, I would love to also show you instances of Tommy condemning these people and saying that there's no place for them in the EDL, but there isn't one. Tommy hasn't so much as whispered their names. That's 66 extra examples for those of you that can be asked to go through and look up the individual examples. If you want more, here's an article from Hope Not Hate that gives similar evidence, a not insubstantial amount of it coming from when Tommy was the leader of the EDL. If you are a supporter of Thomas Robinson, doesn't it feel weird that he's not even willing to post a single tweet to condemn these people? Doesn't it seem weird that he didn't, at any point, introduce basic checks before allowing people to join the EDL? Doesn't it feel weird that he only seems to have an issue with it when it's an immigrant? Okay, I get it. You can cherry-pick 68 examples of convicted abusers being linked to Tommy's organisations, but Tommy's a good bloke and I'll still donate to him. Which reminds me, fundraising. You remember that journalist we spoke about earlier? Lizzie Dearden? The one he tried to intimidate into doing what he wanted her to do in a way not at all dissimilar to the people that he supposedly stands against? Well, she released the article that she was writing. In it, she explains that despite the fact that he had declared himself bankrupt and was listed on the insolvency register, he was receiving hundreds of thousands of pounds a month from his supporters in donations. He was receiving donations after being jailed for contempt of court, despite the fact that his legal defence was already being funded by a group called the Middle East Forum. One of Robinson's former employees explains that money due to cover expenses for their activism never materialised, and that Tommy was withdrawing tens of thousands of pounds that he says were for mates I've got to pay back for seshes. So, cocaine then. Coke. The Devil's Dandruff. Mary Berry's baking powder. Sniff. Blow. Charlie. Booger Sugar. Forrest Bump. Frosty the Blowman. High-speed chicken feed. You know the stuff. Turns out that, according to multiple former employees, Tommy was a bit of a fiend for the white stuff. I mean, this certainly explains why he looks like he's just had Shamu in a headlock in this interview with Jordan Peterson. Oh, shit, the fucking Jordan Peterson interview. I haven't even gotten to that bit yet. Oh, fucking hell. Okay, we'll get to it in a second. Hang on, look. Okay, anyway, yeah. So, former employees say that they were either delayed payments for several months or not remunerated at all. This is all while Tommy would go out, get shit-faced, apparently to the tune of 33 grand kind of shit-faced, and brag about being fucking loaded and making mad money. I mean, it certainly explains how he funds his Stone Island fetish, the chavvy little cunt. Despite the fact that he's apparently more than happy to brag about how much money he earns when he's pissed up, this attitude doesn't extend to the courts. He appeared at the Royal Courts of Justice and told them that he had spunked the money being donated to him on drinking, alcohol, and partying. Partying means drugs, by the way. He'd spent £100,000 on gambling in casinos and online, and he still owed £300,000 to a businessman by the name of Christopher Johnson. When it was raised that, in his 2009 book Enemy of the State, he said that he owned 7 properties, he replied saying, "I like to give off that I'm a successful man when I am not." So, he's willing to continuously repeat this lie, even as recently as last month, but whenever he's called on to actually pay for something, it's all very complicated and he doesn't actually own shit all. It's very convenient, isn't it? It suddenly becomes Schrodinger's bank account when he needs to pay for something other than cocaine and 5-star holidays to fucking Cyprus. Alright, okay, I said we'd get to it, but this really needs to be the last thing, because fucking hell, the last thing I need to do is watch Pinky and the fucking Brain over here talking about how the FBI killed JFK and fucking Hitler built the pyramids. So one of the stops Tommy made before he comes back to the UK and is inevitably put in jail again was to go to Canada and visit a man called Dr. Gordon V. Tieterson, or something. It's called Why the Establishment Hates This Man. It's episode 462 of Norman's podcast, and it seems to be pretty well hidden by YouTube, so go do some digging if it interests you. I'm going to dedicate this portion of the video just to plucking out a couple of the key points from this almost 2-hour-long interview. It will by no means be comprehensive, but play along and we'll try and square what they are saying with what we've already uncovered throughout the video.
And my wife, who's going to join the discussion, she had something to do with this. Tammy and I have been following Tommy for quite a long time. Years, really. Probably 9 years, maybe longer than that.
Okay, so 40 seconds in, and I just want you to bear this in mind. Mormon says that he and his wife Tammy have been following Tommy Robinson for years. 9 years at that. Apparently, this master of the human psyche hasn't, in any of those years, decided to ever Google and read any singular article that criticizes Tommy. It becomes painfully obvious by the lack of pushback on anything at all that they know the square root of fuck all about him. But it's just interesting that he chooses to frame this interview as him being very aware of his life in any meaningful way. He's either bullshitting or a coward.
His school records show 117 disciplinaries. His school records show that the teaching...
He meant he didn't like to break them 150.
150 times. Mm-hmm. But the public were totally deceived on this. And they donated £180,000 to this child, yeah?
Yeah.
And at the same time as this, the English boy was portrayed as a racist bully.
Okay, so here we have Tommy talking about the Syrian boy that sued him. Tommy says that the boy doesn't deserve to be treated as somebody that is telling the truth because he's been accused of lying before. He's been accused of threatening to assault people before. He says that he was deceptive to the British public and that the public were deceived into donating money to him. This is apparently grounds enough for the boy to never be taken seriously. Tommy doesn't, at any point, seem to clock that he himself has been accused of lying. There is objective evidence that he has assaulted people. There is evidence of him threatening to assault people. He has also asked for donations from the British public with all of these instances on record. And he has also admitted to spending north of £100,000 in donations on gambling, drinking and partying, which again means drugs, by the way. Even if this Jamal guy is a complete cunt, and even if all of these accounts are true, that barely scrapes equal to the kinds of things Tommy has been proven to have done. Never mind what he has been accused of. This isn't a lack of self-awareness. This is calculated deceit by the man desperate to beg for more of your money and more of your pity.
So how do they deal with me? They then started legal proceedings. Now, legal proceedings to sue me because they said the allegations I made were lies. Now, so I had to prove...
Who was they?
The lawyers, the law firm. Okay. But then, as a journalist, I can prove everything I reported is what I was told. I had the messages from a mum who sent me pictures of her daughter's face with bite marks, yeah?
Here Tommy complains that he lost the court case for libel because he reported what he was told. He really seems to think that it's outrageous that the judge told him that he needs to have evidence to support that what he said was actually true, and he seems to think that this stunts his journalistic ability. So let's just take a second to really drive this point home. Now, we're talking about two different standards here. The journalistic standard and the legal standard for libel. Firstly, calling yourself a journalist doesn't give you legal immunity from libel, because any old thick cunt could just otherwise go and report on whatever they want, obviously, like you. Libel is when you produce a statement that can be revisited multiple times, like in a book or newspaper or recording or even posts on social media, that defame someone's character. Tommy made the claim that the Syrian boy physically attacked girls at his school and showed the evidence of a photo of a girl with a bruise on her face. This might be evidence that she had a bruise on her face at some point, but to anyone with more than 2 brain cells to rub together, it's obviously not evidence that the Syrian boy specifically is the one that bruised her face. This isn't a question of morality. This isn't a question about Islam, and it doesn't matter what you reckon. It's a legal standard that must be met, and it's there to protect those that are innocent of a crime. Now, I know Tommy's had very little experience with being found innocent of crimes, though, so I'm inclined to let him off for not knowing. He says that, quote, "As a journalist, I can prove everything I reported is what I was told, as if it absolves him of any wrongdoing. Yes, Tommy, everyone knows you were told that, but there is no evidence of that being the truth. So, you could be telling lies, and your job as an investigative journalist is to investigate whether or not something is true." He says that all he did was report the allegation. Except you didn't, did you, Tommy? You reported the allegations as if it were the truth, which isn't the same thing. You assumed that the claims made were truthful, and presented them as the truth in your documentary without clear evidence to support that it was a truthful statement. Now, if we want to talk about the journalistic standards, of which the most prominent example would be those set out by the National Union of Journalists on screen now for those that want to pause and read them, you'll notice that point 7 explicitly states that he should protect the identity of sources that supply information in confidence, which he failed to do in his documentary. The man is just a walking contradiction, a complete fucking div. He has simply never bothered to inform himself about anything at all.
She had 2 9-year-old little girls with her twins, 2 mixed race little girls who were Bailey's little sisters.
Right. Oh, yes, right.
So
That's important.
Yeah, it's because they're calling them a racist family. So I said to the family...
So you can't be racist if you have a mixed race family? Dorman also finds this absurd, which is so worrying. I suppose psychology school doesn't teach you how to diagnose stupidity. After all, how could I hate Pakistanis? My wife is from Hawaii. The film is not opinion-based. It's fact-based. It's school records. It's...
When are you going to release it?
So I'm not allowed... So basically, since I've been here, the film was played in America 2 years ago in a cinema in Florida. General Flynn was there. He gave his account of what he watched. He said, it's unbelievable what I've just watched. Because what people need to understand is, you see what they've done to me is exactly the same lawfare that's going on across the whole Western world to anyone who raises their voice. What I managed to do is document every single part of it and show what I call the Unholy Alliance, the alliance together of the judiciary, of far-left organisations, Muslim organisations.
He mentions the lawfare being waged against him and people who speak the truth that comprises the judiciary, far-left organisations and Muslim organisations that are working together to control the narrative. That's cool and everything, but I'm still wondering why Douglas Murray hasn't been arrested for speaking the truth yet. Why hasn't Suella Braverman been arrested for speaking the truth? Or Katie Hopkins or Nigel Farage? The answer, by the way, if you're lacking brain cells, is because the others are saying stupid shit without taking actionable steps to commit crimes.
But when I come out of court that day with the injunction, I was scared, in all honesty. I've been in prison multiple times to do with my work.
I've been in prison multiple times to do with my work? Okay, here's more of this pesky evidence stuff that Tommy keeps getting confused by. In this case, it's evidence that he likes to lie to people. As we mentioned earlier, he was imprisoned in 2005 for assaulting an off-duty police officer. He was jailed for 10 months for travelling to the US on somebody else's passport. And let's not forget the 18-month sentence for mortgage fraud. That's 3 separate stays at His Majesty's pleasure for reasons that have absolutely fuck all to do with him talking about Muslims. He is a blatant fraud, and Fraud and Eat Beeferson is either too weak to call him out on it or too stupid to understand that he's lying. The whole interview goes on like this, and it's why I'm struggling between having sympathy for people that follow Tommy's narrative and thinking they're a bunch of dickheads. It's absolutely plainly obvious that he's either an unashamed grifter or a complete fucking idiot. But when people like Morton Deleterson give him the time of day and don't call him out on his bullshit, it legitimizes him in his audience's eyes. As I said earlier, if the establishment wants to silence people talking about the horrors of Islam, why haven't they gone after Douglas Murray, or Suella Braverman, or Lee Anderson, or Nigel Farage, or Priti Patel? These are members of the government, for fuck's sake. It makes no sense. Maybe Tommy is an outlier because Tommy is a fucking criminal. Okay, let's get some final thoughts. It should be clear by this point that Tommy Robinson is a compulsive liar, a career criminal, and someone that is more than willing to lie to people like you time and time again if it means you'll donate a tenner to his Coke fund. It takes a special kind of cunt to be so violent and so racist that even Nigel Farage doesn't want to be associated with you. The truth is, most people in the UK have concerns around immigration. Most people on the left want limits on immigration. We should always be willing to talk to people about these things, but if we oppose people like Tommy Robinson without explaining why we oppose them, we're making average people make a choice between those that acknowledge the problems that they see and those that refuse to. To be clear, my issue with Tommy isn't that he takes drugs or that he doesn't like what's written in the Quran. It's that he hasn't shown a consistent opposition to rape or sexual assault or physical violence or criminal behaviour at all. He isn't the opposite of a jihadi terrorist. He's just the white version. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, please do like and subscribe, it really helps. I know it means very little, but I'd love to hit 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so I really appreciate you guys' support. A huge thank you to my incredibly patient and gorgeous supporters on Patreon. If you'd like to support, you can do so from just £1 a month, the link is in the description. In return, I promise I won't spend it on gambling or a crippling drug addiction. Love you, bye bye.